Hello and welcome to the global series on hydrogen, where we slice through the buzz to see how rhetoric of green hydrogen especially can be turned into reality. Very glad to have 𝗦𝗰𝗹𝗏𝗏, Managing Director Infrastructure Energy Transition for Ardian, a private investment house with global influence, here with us today. Hi, Amir.
Hi, very pleased to be here with you, Michelle.
Thank you. As part of its recovery plan, let's look at the EU with a few broad strokes. And as part of the recovery plan that's been crafted in the last year or so, it seems that the EU is trying to tap into the Clean Hydrogen Partnership and invest an innovation fund of up to $36 billion. The starting figure is $6 billion. So in itself, that's a huge range that you might want to touch upon, and how that feeds through into investors' confidence that the differential is so massive. But there are other various instruments to take EU-wide production of green hydrogen specifically past the 1 million ton mark every year. What would you say are some of the challenges in achieving this production goal?
It's a very relevant question. I think to give a background, I think there's not so many subjects on the table that are worth such big investments, helping to decarbonize and grow the industry. The hydrogen industry, both in terms of deployments and in terms of technologies, was ready, taking many of the EU requirements for the recovery plan. So in this respect, I think it was really something that was at the right point, coming at the right point in time to make the change happen. And maybe to link it to why we are also looking at this matter very seriously now is because in many respects, we feel we are ready. Some of the elements are not yet defined in terms of the regulation, but we need to also work in parallel to build the real infra-like investments, which would be bankable in many respects and meeting the investment criteria for the players like ourselves. And I think we can play a role in making this happen. So we are very happy to exchange with the local authorities, with the governments, with the industrials, to share views on how we can build a case that is relevant for the industry and for the financials.
Because confidence is really what you're talking about there, you know, in a nutshell, is that it's about building confidence in the market for investors as well as for policymakers, and they need to take the right steps forward to create those cornerstones and to put those pegs in the sand so everybody knows the parameters, and in turn that will help build the confidence. And the appetite is certainly there to start getting those pegs in the sand and start making big changes. But do you think that the confidence still has a little way to go, or perhaps the market's overconfident and some of these goals are a little bit pie in the sky at the moment?
There is, I think, somehow two worlds. On one side, you can see the listed world where there are some valuations that are going through the roof in terms of the hydrogen stocks. And there was a recent IPO of a company called HRS recently that was 6 times oversubscribed, and many other stocks like Plug Power and Nikola that have been skyrocketing. And on the other hand, when you look at people who are really on the ground making financing of such investments, like ourselves and the peers in the financial industry, there is a level of caution as to when this will really be true and reliable. And I think in the meantime, so to bridge the gap between these two worlds, you need, as you say, a level of confidence. I think it's the right word, but I would say confidence will not happen if you don't have the appropriate structures being put in place. And so the matter, and I think the goal that we'll have to work towards, is to create the structures that will make an hydrogen investment something that is compatible with normal investment criteria. We should not make it something which is abnormal or exceptional. It should be something that is really in line with our normal way of going, because this is really something that is, I think, in a short amount of time, can become truly disruptive.
Positively disruptive, of course.
Positively disruptive.
Yes. Does this echo...
In terms of the CO2, I was meaning,
yeah,
in terms of CO2 change, but still using our usual instruments.
Absolutely, and you know, trying to avoid that risk of stranded assets as well with the energy transition and converting some of the existing infrastructure to make it greener, and that's that's a whole nother conversation, of course. Do you think that there's a risk here that there's the momentum and the feeling towards green hydrogen specifically echoes what we saw with solar nearly a decade before solar actually started being viable on a commercial scale? There was a lot of interest. There were a lot of new technologies that promised, great things. There was a lot of policy support to a degree. There was, the right risk factor as well. There was no safety issues regarding it, and it was going to completely transform the whole energy basket in the next 10 years, and everything's going to change. Now, of course, we're only just beginning to see that in the last 5-7 years or so, but there was a big chunk of time where a lot of it was rhetoric. Now, do you think that we're at risk of that happening with green hydrogen, just green? Again, in that, as you just touched upon, there are these two camps, just like there were with solar. Is there a risk that this could happen with green, and that these ideas to be globally competitive hydrogen economies, energy economies by 2030, which is only 9 years away, are just a little bit too ambitious?
I would not qualify the ambition, but I would certainly say there are common factors with what solar was at its infancy, and we were part of the players who were looking at renewables in the 2000s. In 2005, 2006, we started to invest in that field, and I think the vision that we had at that time has somehow come true, and we can see that there are leapfrogs that have been made in this industry that have made that renewable energy truly competitive in the merit order, which was not totally foreseeable at that point in time.
If anything, it's accelerated in recent years faster than anybody expected. It's gone from being the tortoise to suddenly the hare in the last few years.
Exactly, and then we can see that despite all odds, the cost of producing renewable energy is still going down, and this is a very big surprise, because at some point in time you could think that we had reached the floor, and it's still not the case. And we can see the recent auctions in Portugal or in Spain being at levels which are surprisingly low, which is very good. Effectively, it's good for
projects of such scale, because it's not just the price; it's the scalability of these projects as well that's so critical.
It is a matter of scale, but if you talk about scale, I think that's where hydrogen can have an even greater role, because I think the big difference with renewables is that you can't abate many sectors with electricity. There's many sectors which are somehow linked to fuels today, which are gas or oil, that will not be replaced with power, that can be truly replaced in a massive way with something that is similar in terms of versatility.
And hydrogen,
and hydrogen is there in terms of versatility, in terms of being similar to in the way the molecule is being converted, the way the molecule can be transported, in the way the molecule can be produced. It has so much similarities with oil that some people have been calling it the green oil or the green gas of the future. And I think that definitely makes sense. What is difficult to apprehend today is the speed at which this will be competitive.
Indeed, and 2030 seems to be this banner year that countries and companies are aiming for. But if you had to, and this is a big question to try and whittle down, but best you can, if you had to choose 3 routes or 3 mechanisms that the energy industry should be focusing on to make green hydrogen cost competitive to the other types of hydrogen, and indeed the broader renewable energy basket by 2030, what do you think those should be?
Well, I think what makes the economics of the production cost is basically for production is on one side the LCOE of renewables, the electrolyzer price and cost, and that is very much linked to scale and demand ultimately. And then there's one element that people maybe don't mention that much, is the business optimizations from a couple between, on one side, the flexibility of electricity producers, and on the other side, the flexibility of the hydrogen producers. And there is a game to be defined in terms of how you match the the intermittency of your renewable power on one side, but the fact that your electrolyzer is also something flexible. And there is an optimization that can be found there. That is a way to alleviate and to get you closer to your low cost without having to wait for as long as people may expect.
And what do you foresee with the electrolyzer market? If we look just to 2025, for example, and that's only 4 years away from a market to make huge progress. That's not very long, really. What would you hope the electrolyzer market looks like by 2025? Like you say, it's critical to scale, it's critical to application, economics, the whole picture.
There is, I mean, in France, for instance, there has been a major focus of the French plan to support electrolyzer capacity. I think the critical point with the electrolyzer will be to have sufficient capacity to meet with the demand that could be there in the future, and it's an industrial game, really. And this is not something that we should underestimate. And number of players are building up capacities right now. Question is, which will be the technology that will be able to meet the demands of the requirements of the economical equation in the future. And there's a couple of options on the table, and probably they will be able to live together between, on one side, the alkaline, and on the other side, the PEM technology. Probably both will be able to live in parallel and in different situations with different type of economics and different scale.
And we saw the first launch of a hydrogen ETF in the last couple of weeks as well, in a reflection of what investors are looking towards. And like you say, there seems to be these two camps, and confidence is a critical play there. If you had to summarize investors' appetite for green hydrogen in literally a couple of words, which words would you choose?
I would say that these words should be linked to building a reliable investment case. I think that is the point.
And what would you have said 5 years ago?
I think 5 years ago, the main difference is you didn't have the government support coming up as loud. I mean, just in 2020, there were 70 billion of money from public sources being announced in Europe. That is a big signal that the reliability I was talking about could come and be ready to make the mechanisms in terms of push or pull, and the requirements be there, and then create the confidence, but also by creating the structure that I was mentioning before. Yeah, so the architecture.
5 years ago, it's fair to say that they were reluctant. The market just didn't seem a formidable option, for the long term, and they were reluctant. Now they're keen to build a reliable ecosystem and a sound investment decision as well, but they're very eager and hungry to do it. By 2030, do you think that Europe, for example, will be a leading hydrogen economy in terms of policy, in terms of a market, a traded market, perhaps, possibly on the export side? But do you see Europe reaching these goals in terms of its scale by 2030? Just as a quick yes or no.
I think Europe has a lot of advantages for that.
You can say not sure if you like. That can be the third option.
Well, I don't want to speculate. It's not in my nature, but I think Europe is very well placed in the overall game. But it will be a global game. I think ultimately it has to work with cooperation at a global level, and each geography can have its own advantages. There are locations where you can produce the green hydrogen at massive scale, like Australia or Chile, and you could export it. You could export it to other locations. There's locations where it makes sense to produce it and to have it consumed there. And Europe is actually a very interesting hub in this respect. Asia is a very advanced in terms of mobility.
Europe is talking about possibly importing in the longer term from the Middle East. I know the Middle East has its eye on that as well. as you say, it's very much going to be an interconnecting ecosystem. It's indeed an ecosystem, but perhaps manufacturing and so on will be done more from the Asia front. And like you say, Europe has soared when it comes to the policy front and has got a very firm hydrogen strategy in place, which of course we're already well within as well. Amir, thank you so much for joining us. I think you've given us a lot to chew on, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks to you.